Hey folks, now that we're pretty deep into Cycle 1, I've had the chance to put hundreds of hours into Circle of Fortune, and I think it's safe to say at this point there's probably very few players who have spent more time really trying to understand COF and everything it has to offer than myself, and I really hope that that makes me somewhat qualified to make this video on some of the things I think are really great about COF, and also some things that could potentially be improved, and maybe some ideas around how we could work towards those improvements. If you agree with my points, please consider leaving a like on the video as it will help the visibility of it. And if you don't agree, then definitely let me know in the comments, and I'm always happy to have those discussions. So jumping right into it, I think it's really important that we start this off on a positive note, and that is that the faction system in general is one of the most brilliant solutions to an age-old ARPG problem, and that is that players really don't want to feel penalized for not engaging in trade. As a 1.0 implementation of this sort of system, I think EHG has done a really great job in making sure that COF does meet the goal that it was set out to do, and there's very few problems that are really holding it back. I think it's important to state that I don't think every item needs to be as easy to obtain for Circle of Fortune as it is for Merchant Guild. It's completely okay that each faction has its own strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into playing Merchant's Guild effectively, and players should be rewarded for developing those skills. I'll start off by talking a little bit about target farming. I think the number one complaint among COF players is the drops that only have one source. So as an example, a boss-specific drop like Core of the Mountain, this only drops from the T4 Lightless Arbor boss at a 12% chance. For Merchant Guild players, they're still able to use their faction mechanic, which is trade, to acquire items like this. So if a Merchant Guild player wants, they never even have to run this dungeon, which I think most players don't actually enjoy. And they can still reasonably obtain these items because they are somewhat niche, and they will be fairly obtainable on the market. However, if you're a COF player, it has to be T4 dungeon that you're running, and even then, there's only a 12% chance. Once you do get the item, there's still a pretty wide range of the rolls, which there's no way to re-roll these numbers with like a PoE. There's Divine Orbs. There's nothing like that in this game. And even then, once you do get the item, and maybe it has a good roll, there's a very low chance that it will have LP. And even once that happens, you still have a 1 in 4 chance of actually landing the affix that you want in the Temporal Sanctum. So all of that together makes farming the boss-specific drops pretty painful for COF. One potential solution could be that for the COF rank 6 bonus, where uniques have twice the chance to have LP, we could add an extra component to this where this effect is doubled for boss-exclusive drops or something like that. And I think something that might actually even be better than that would be if the boss loot tables themselves, somewhere we had some increase to that. So like boss exclusive drops are twice as likely, maybe on one of the COF rank bonuses or something like that. So instead of like a 12% chance for Core of the Mountain, it would be 24. Something along those lines I think would go a long way to make acquiring these drops less painful to target farm. Another potential solution that's a little bit different, I'm not sure how this would be implemented, but you could make it so that uniques are lucky, or like affixes are lucky. So just as an example of how this may work is when a unique item drops, you can see the affixes all have roll ranges. Maybe when an item like this drops, each affix is rolled twice, and the highest of the two rolls is taken. So like, for example, if the all attributes are rolled +6 and then +8, on the final item, it could take +8. So on average, you could make it so that COF items have better roll ranges. On the same note as boss drops, we also have the issue with exiled mage drops. So as you can see by my stockpile of research runes, I've probably killed over 2,000 exiled mages in Cycle 1. And after doing that, I've only dropped 3 3LP ladles. And what's even worse is the experimental items. You can see I have them here. if you're looking for a specific experimental affix, regardless of how many mages you kill, you're probably going to have a very hard time actually getting one that you can use for your build. So just as an example, I was playing a low-life warlock build earlier, and I've never dropped a single T7 low-life affix. So that is the current health loss per second, missing health gained as ward. Never dropped this in T7. And that's not even on like a good base. Like I don't even care if it's a terrible base. That's on any base at all. And there's no other way other than the exiled mages to get these types of items. So there's a few ways that we could maybe make that a little bit easier. You could have prophecies that are for experimental items, or maybe you could have some extra system where you can choose what you're looking to target. So like some sort of kind of like blessings, how they let you target specific things. You could have something like that for experimental items. I don't know if we want to make them drop from things other than the mage because it's supposed to be a mage exclusive item. So maybe you could make the experimental items have higher tiers. So they're like twice as likely to be tier 7 or tier 6 or just exalted in general. That could be tied into maybe one of the rank rewards. So something along here, T7 affixes are twice as common, this effect is doubled for experimentals, or something like that. Anything really that would help with the experimentals and mage drops also would go a long way towards making our characters just feel a little bit more, I guess, close the gap between Merchant Guild and COF for those specific items. Next, I want to talk a little bit about exalted items in general. So one thing that you'll notice while you're playing the game is that for every unique item that drops, there's probably 10 to 20 or more exalted items. That's the way the game is balanced. In general, exalted items are somewhat disposable. They have the FP system. So as you're crafting items, you throw it in here. There's a good chance for every exalted item you get, even with a good affix that you want, it'll probably be a brick. Like you're going to try and make it better. You'll use Rune of Removal or Glyph of Insight or something like that. There's also a huge number of affixes depending on the item type that you're trying to get. Or maybe you've run out of FP trying to make it good, and you find another one. That's just the way the crafting system is designed. Exalts are generally disposable. The problem with prophecies is that if we look at my spreadsheet on the different prophecies and the items that they give, when you compare exalted items to unique items, unlike the rest of the game, the price per item, so like here I have the favor cost per item, is actually very similar between uniques and exalts. So what you would expect is for exalts to be much cheaper than uniques on a per item basis. But here you can see we have unique helmets. It's about 700 favor per item. And we have exalted helmets here. It's about 600 favor per item. So that feels a little bit misaligned with the expected abundance of exalted items relative to unique items. So once you get deep into endgame, what you'll find is that you often have a lot of good unique items ready to slam, but you end up finding that you have a lack of exalted items that are worth slamming into those items. That's a little bit problematic. Another thing that's also an issue with exalted items is if you're looking for an exalted item on a specific base type. So for example, I was really looking for a Oracle Amulet and Eternal Gauntlets to try and craft them for my build. It's very, very hard to target farm these specific item bases. So as for the prophecies, there's no Eternal Gauntlet prophecy, there's no Oracle Amulet prophecy, there's just exalted gloves. So while you're rolling those gloves, not only do you need to get the correct base type, then you need to also get the affix that you want on it. So both of those independent rolls are happening. And just getting gauntlets like these, I had to spend millions of favor. That is way more than most players will have the opportunity to spend. So I think there's a few ways that we could probably make this system a little bit more streamlined. So either we could add some sort of affix targeting, some like selection system where you can pick the type of affixes you're looking for, or we could also change the prophecies so that there's more targeted prophecies for like good item bases, or maybe some sort of like selection when you're rolling prophecies. You can pick the type of items that you want, or even if you could spend extra favor to make your prophecies more targeted, that would probably go a long way too. Or as I said before, something similar to blessings, where maybe you could like say I'm interested in like mage type affixes, or like mana type affixes, or something like that, where you can like target what you want, or even like specific base types, something like that. Another really small note on the topic of exalted items is that I find it a little bit unfortunate. The rare item prophecies all have a specific item type, because the rare items obviously are intended to be an early game prophecy. However, there is some synergy with the items that would have a chance to drop as rare become exalted. This upgrade makes these rare prophecies become somewhat useful late game. But the issue, because they have a specific type assigned to them, so like Crusader Gauntlets here, you can't really use them to target, for example, the Eternal Gauntlets I was mentioning earlier. So like you can see here the Glove Prophecy. It's extremely cost effective if you're using them to get exalts, but because it's a specific type, I can't actually use them. So this is just a dead prophecy that I need to roll past. To that end, we do already have a way to block certain events through the blocker lenses. However, there's no way to block certain types of prophecies. So like, for example, I have no way to remove this basically useless to me prophecy from the pool, or set items, or anything like that as I go further into endgame, and a lot of the early game prophecies are no longer useful. You just end up at a point where the prophecy pool is extremely diluted, and I need to click reroll many, many times, just spamming this reroll button over and over until I actually get a prophecy that I can use. And not only is that very tedious, it also makes all the favor rolling become very cost ineffective, even with efficient lens usage. Another issue I have with lenses specifically is because of how much more effective certain lenses are than other ones, it really limits the sense of agency that you have when trying to manipulate how you roll your prophecies. So just as an example, these two lenses here are significantly more cost effective than every other lens in the game in almost every single scenario. So basically when you get to endgame, you're always picking these two lenses, and if you are, I believe, rank 9 COF, one other lens. So most of the time that's going to be unique chance. Occasionally it will be a blocker, but usually not. And sometimes it will be a specific item type, especially if you're rolling in the weapon region. And that's pretty much it. It feels a little bit lame that this is just the best, and there's very little flexibility or customization. I think one thing that we probably could do is either these bonuses could be just rolled into the base prophecies where they're always active, and then you can choose 3 other lenses, or the other lenses could be brought up in power. So for example, these percentages here, where it's 20% per rank, it could be a lot higher. I don't even think that this would be a problem, because even when you're rank 10 and say you're rolling daggers, with this slotted in, you're still at a very low chance to actually encounter a dagger while you're rolling, just because of how many prophecies there are and how few of them are the specific type you want. Just to quickly show what I'm talking about, here is my lens calculator spreadsheet. This is used to determine what your chance for getting desired outcomes is with different lens selections. So in this example, I'm interested in unique daggers. So here you can see in the weapon region, I've selected 2 of the unique dagger prophecies. There are only 2 out of, I believe, 81 total prophecy rewards. And you can see here, with no lens selected and COF rank 10, I have a 2.47% chance per roll to see unique daggers. And with my event selected here, so in this example, I'm only interested in monoliths. So the current timeline I'm running, as well as any enemy that spawns in that timeline, and the boss, exiled mages, all that stuff, there's a 28% chance of getting the event I want. You multiply these two, and then this is the chance for the actual outcome you want. So on average, I'm going to have to reroll 28 times before I get a unique dagger in the monolith timeline that I'm running. And even if I add the dagger lens here, it's still going to take me 11 rerolls per. That's over 3,000 favor spent just on rerolling. So to my earlier point, if we took the 20% per level on the dagger and say we increase it to 50%, just as an example, that would take us to 6.52 rerolls. So quite a bit better. And your chance for the reward that you want, even excluding the events, would be about 11%, so a lot better. So I do think that we should probably up these numbers. The lens percent chances here. So instead of like 15 on the unique here, this should be a lot higher. Instead of like 20% here, this should probably be a lot higher. And I think it would probably also make sense for these to be rolled into the base game as like a toggle, like I said. And that would also add a lot less confusion, because I've seen a lot of new players, they're very confused on lenses. There's a lot of information to take in here, and they end up relying on like third-party tools like the one I've built in order to know what to do. And I don't think that that's the intent of the EHD devs, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. One thing that would be really nice, maybe as a more endgame lens option, could be some sort of lens that only allows you to roll one specific condition type. So for example, you could have some endgame lenses where it only allows you to roll monolith, or only allows you to run temporal sanctum, or stuff like that, that could vastly reduce the amount of rerolls that you have. While we're in the faction vendor, I also want to quickly talk about the items. I feel like the favor costs of these items make them basically not really usable. So the favor cost here, it's about 4,200 per item. And when you look at the actual prophecies themselves, it's something like 10 times cheaper on a per item basis. Even for like uniques or exalts, it's something like 600 or 700 favor per item. These just feel significantly too expensive to be useful. Early game, because favor is based on experience, when you could actually use these items, it's very hard to justify the favor cost that they have. So I think there's some potential benefit that players could have early game if these costs were a little bit more reasonable. Another thing I want to quickly touch on is the LP prophecies. I really like the idea of spending more favor in order to get higher quality items. This reduces the amount of clutter you end up getting in endgame. But in the current state of the game, the way the prophecy just skips to 1 LP versus giving you a higher chance of LP means that it's more effective for higher LP level items. So if we go to the spreadsheet where I did all the math on this already, you could see that the favor cost efficiency is a lot higher for high LP items versus low LP items. That's because, as an example, an LP level 0 item is already basically guaranteed to drop as 1 LP for COF players because of the LP bonus. So this extra guaranteed 1 LP from the prophecy doesn't really do anything, versus very high LP level items that have a low chance, the guaranteed 1 LP is much more valuable. So I think that's a little bit problematic. If it was just something like a 2 times or 3 times chance for LP, you would see a more uniform bonus across all uniques of different LP levels. That would probably be a little bit better. Another issue is that just in general, the favor cost efficiency of these prophecies is very poor. So even if you use it for the most optimal scenario, so say for example you want a Ravenous Void, it's still only 50% as cost effective versus just running the unique gloves. Another thing that I've noticed is that there's quite a disparity between different types of prophecies. So just as an example here, you could see for unique one-handed maces, there's a prophecy here that has 5 uses. So if you wanted to farm unique one-handed maces, one potential event you might have if you are running the 2 times lenses is you might have to kill Shade of Orbis 10 times. In contrast, if we look at the Catalyst prophecies, the most uses we have is only 1. So that would be 2 shade kills versus 10 to get the same amount of reward. So I find that this disparity makes running certain prophecies just generally feel very discouraging versus others. And also I've noticed there's some inconsistency among the costs of different prophecies. So as an example, we have the idols here, and you can see that the Stout Ligonian idols is about 4 times as expensive per item as most of the other idols. So this is a huge difference, and even running regular idol prophecies might end up being more cost effective if you want these Stout idols. So that feels a little bit strange, and there's a lot of different inconsistencies like that among the different favor costs. It also goes into the lenses as well. So the lenses, like the double use and the double reward lens, they say it's plus 80% or plus 90% more favor cost. But if you actually look at the favor costs of all of the different prophecies with those lenses applied, the actual multiplier is not what the lens says that it is. So as an example here, you can see if you're using no lens and you run the Exalted Body Armor Prophecy here, it's favor cost of 1000. But if you add the plus 80% more favor cost, you would expect it would go up to 1800, but it's actually goes up to 2000, so it doubles. And with the plus 90% favor cost, it also goes up to 2000. So whether you do 80% or 90%, it's actually the same. And then if you do both of them, so you'd expect 242% more cost, here it is 250. So there's a lot of like inconsistencies with just the numbers here that I don't know if they're intended or not, but I feel like this could be cleaned up just a little bit. Another potential game balance issue with COF is that because how favor and reputation is tied directly to experience gained, that means that the quality of gear you can get on a character is directly tied to the amount of corruption you're able to do on that character. So you can see here with this character, I'm currently at 3500 corruption, which means the monsters give 4100% increased experience. That means I get over 40 times more favor. And the result of that is that I get better gear, which means I can push more corruption and then in turn, better gear again. So builds that aren't able to push a lot of corruption just end up with significantly worse gear, and it creates a bit of a snowball effect where strong characters just end up getting significantly stronger and weak characters can't really get the gear they need. This also creates a bit of an incentive for even endgame players that are already level 100 to run XP Tome Echoes, which doesn't really seem intuitive. Why would you run experience when you're already level 100? It's a little bit weird. And also do things like taking the experience blessings. All this stuff feels very weird, and it doesn't really make sense that this is the most optimal way to play the game as endgame COF. It also means that COF players specifically are very vulnerable to balance changes. If the game is made more difficult, or to a point where you're not able to push as much corruption without changing the experience gained, characters playing COF are just going to have significantly worse gear as a result of that. This is also potentially a problem for Merchant Guild players because you do get more gold in higher corruption and you do drop more items, but it's definitely a bigger problem for COF players where the experience does scale linearly with the corruption. Another issue too with corruption and COF is that because the prophecies themselves, the drops are affected by corruption, that also creates an incentive for players to only proc their prophecies in the highest corruption timeline that they have in order to get the best results. So if you want to play the game optimally, that means that you would basically never be running dungeons, arena, or anything other than specifically monolith timelines, and that's only a very small number of the actual prophecies are in monoliths. So you end up just spending a bunch of rerolls or just cope with playing the game in a way that's not the most optimal, which feels weird when COF is already at a gearing disadvantage endgame versus Merchant Guild. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about some UI and UX issues. To start, some of the prophecies have certain events that aren't exactly clear where they're located. So as an example, here is deaths of Siege Golem. A lot of areas in the game don't actually have Siege Golem, so you could be running a timeline for weeks and never actually complete this prophecy. What this ends up doing is that players are using third-party tools and resources to try and figure out where these prophecies are actually spawned, and this feels a little bit against the spirit of what the game is intending. And a lot of monsters actually have multiple different skins of the same monster that are actually different types. So as an example, the Void Horror Prophecy. There are different types of Void Horror, and in timelines, the ones that spawn from the beacons don't actually count towards the prophecy completion. Another thing that I think would be a really nice quality of life would be if the prophecies that you have had a search bar here. So for example, if I could type in Temporal Sanctum and it would highlight all my Temporal Sanctum prophecies, or if I could type in any of the text, kind of like how the stash has text searching, something like that would be really nice. Another thing that would be really nice would be if the prophecies with generic items were replaced with the generic item icons, similar to how the ones in the echo webs have been replaced. So for example, this unique one here has the ring icon. This could be the little star icon instead. I think that would make it feel a lot more consistent while rolling the different prophecies, and you could quickly identify visually what they are, versus here we have unique armor with Weaver's Will, but it has the same icon as body armor. Another really minor point on prophecy rolling is that there are already Weaver's Will prophecies that are specifically dedicated to Weaver's items. However, these Weaver items can also roll from the normal non-Weaver prophecies. So what you'll find is if you're running, for example, unique gloves, you'll get a lot of Weaver gloves because they're common. However, that may not be what you actually want, and it gets a little bit diluted because of all the Weaver items you end up getting. I think overall, there's a lot of really great things going on with prophecies and how we acquire them and fulfill them. One thing I think would be really nice to have would be some sort of way to sync more favor in endgame in exchange for increasing the quality or quantity of our prophecy rewards. So one example of something we could do might be to increase the reroll cost, have some sort of mechanic where you can increase the reroll cost to reduce the amount of events you're not interested in. So maybe you can like select certain things like a dungeon, and in exchange the reroll cost goes up, just to make rolling prophecies a lot less tedious. Or maybe you can further increase the favor cost of the prophecies themselves for more bonuses similar to the lenses. Or you could maybe spend some favor to make them more specific, like you can define base types by spending more favor for like exalts or whatever. Yes, I think something like that would definitely add a lot more flavor to prophecy rolling. Another thing I hinted at earlier is that it would be nice if there was a lot more uniformity between the prophecy events and the prophecy rewards. As an example, some events are significantly more frustrating to complete than others. So for example, Shade of Orbis is something you kill pretty rarely, whereas kill the rare monster is something that you'll probably complete within 10 minutes. And also some monsters just don't spawn in a bunch of areas. So you might have like kill Void Horrors or kill Siege Golems open for like 1 or 2 weeks, depending on the content you're actually doing. And it would also be nice to have some more uniformity between the prophecy rewards themselves. So just as an example I mentioned earlier, some items have, they grant you 1 item per kill or event complete, and there's like 4 base usages, whereas other item types might have prophecies that you get 4 items per event. So that means that what I've found from farming a bunch of items is some items are a lot more frustrating to complete prophecies on than others, just because of how many more times I need to do the event in order to get the reward. Next, I want to talk a little bit about actually running the prophecies and having them proc at inopportune times. In the clip you can see here, I'm fighting a boss, the boss dies, it procs prophecies, and then while I'm looking at the loot, I die to a DOT that I didn't see. You could say this is a skill issue, fine, this is my fault. But also this happens a lot when you're trying to run through maps and there's spires shooting at you. You can't really go through all your loot while the spires are shooting. You can't really grab the loot if it drops while you're in the boss fight. So for example, this abomination fight, the soul vessels or whatever they are, they count as bosses too. So they pop out a bunch of items and you can't actually loot those items until you finish the boss fight. So if you die in that boss fight after proccing the items, you lose all of them. So it's a pretty terrible feeling. This is also an issue if you kill, for example, the Soulfire Bastion boss and you accidentally click the exit door while going over all the loot. This happened to me and it was pretty painful because I wasn't able to go over probably like 50 uniques. So that feels pretty bad too. I know that the Merchant Guild, they have the Bazaar. If they sell an item, it goes into their inbox and then they can click to redeem it. It would be really nice if COF had some sort of like remove only tab or stash or some like intermediary something where you don't lose all of your prophecy procs if you die or something before getting a chance to go over them. Another really big issue that's extremely painful for endgame COF is that you reach a certain point where you're dropping a massive pile of unique items. I know this is not going to be the experience of a lot of players because I'm pretty deep into corruption, which may or may not even be indicative of a broken mechanic to begin with. But at this point in the game, for me, it's pretty common to drop hundreds of unique items at a time. This is what it looks like in the background, me killing Shade with a bunch of prophecies proccing. And in the game right now, we don't really have any way to properly filter that. We can sort of make unique filters somewhat, assuming, like, for example, you have specific subtypes of an item. So for here, we have the Ravenous Void filter. Here I have a red ring where I have silver ring level 79, but these are not very good filters. And even then, there's no way for us to actually filter for LP. So whenever I get these giant pops of loot with hundreds of items, I have to actually go through most of them manually. I wouldn't even know if one of them had a 4 LP. I probably lost a handful of 4 LPs just because I wasn't able to pick them up for whatever reason, or I died, or I accidentally left the area, or something like that. So any sort of improvement for the filter, I think, is a huge win for COF and very necessary as a quality of life. One thing that might actually help alleviate this a little bit is if we had some remove only stash tab that had like search functionality, because then you could just search for LP or a specific item or something like that. Another thing that would help is if we were able to further increase the quality of our items, like I mentioned before, for prophecies. So if I could spend 10 times more favor and get 10 times higher quality items, then I wouldn't be getting giant pops of crap. It would actually be smaller loot explosions of higher quality items. So that would be pretty nice too. Before I close, I think there's one other system or mechanic that I think would be really cool to have in the game and also fit thematically with COF. And that would be some way to modify the base drops that you get outside of prophecies. So one example of this could be something like non-combat blessings are twice as effective, or maybe you have twice the chance of dropping caster weapons, half the chance of dropping melee weapons. Some sort of like extra customizability where you can modify your drop tables. Because normally while you're running through the echoes or dungeons or whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't really feel like, other than prophecies, you have any sort of targeting in your game. You have the echo rewards, which don't really have much impact. You have like exalted item echo rewards. Like most of these things don't really have any meaningful impact on your gear progression. So anything outside of prophecies I think would be really cool. Or maybe like there's some way for you to manipulate the affixes that drop more commonly. So like while you're just running through echoes, if you could have it so if you're playing a mage affixes drop more often. That's something that already exists in the blessing system, but for COF players it would be nice if there was some extra little something to just make the target farming feel a little bit more personalized to whatever build you're playing. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for today. This has been a really long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you actually made it this far, I'm really impressed. And thank you so much for watching. Definitely feel free to leave any of your thoughts and opinions in the comment. Let me know all the things that you think I missed in this video. Cheers, folks.